Thank God it's Friday. Get ready for a special TGIF edition of Muscle, Science and Application.
Hey everyone, we're back with another TGIF Friday, Valentine's Day Friday to be exact, edition of Muscle, Science and Application. Today's interview is with someone who's no stranger to many of you, Dr. Layne Norton. Over the past decade or so, Layne has positioned himself as a true leader in the field of body composition optimization for both aesthetics and performance. If you are someone who has been frustrated with clients where the laws of calories in versus calories out almost don't seem to apply at times, I highly recommend that you read the show notes for numerous links to all of Layne's great content. Concepts such as metabolic damage and adaptation, as well as the importance of building a metabolic capacity to allow for fat loss, and a concept called reverse dieting are all discussed in thorough detail in his hugely popular videos, some receiving well over 100,000 views on Layne's YouTube channel, BioLayne, or at biolayne.com. This is the kind of stuff they don't teach you in textbooks, and that Layne and other top nutrition experts have learned only through working with literally many hundreds of clients. As I introduce Layne in today's episode, I'll give a full intro for any of you not familiar with his background. However, since many of you are and have heard Layne speak on a variety of topics relating to training and nutrition, today's interview is going to take more of a behind-the-scenes approach, asking Layne a little bit more personal questions about his lifestyle, training, and business strategy. I always like to try and bring something different to the table, and so I hope you enjoy. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. I couldn't be more excited about my guest today. He is an IFPA and NGA Pro natural bodybuilder. He's also an elite raw powerlifter, deadlifting 700 pounds, over 600 in the squat, and approaching 4 plates on the bench press in the 220-pound class. We did all the above while earning his PhD in Nutritional Science, studying leucine and muscle protein metabolism, marrying his wife, battling through a pec tear, and many other things. He's one of the most sought-after contest prep coaches in the bodybuilding and fitness community. He's a contributing author for numerous magazines and websites. He's authored multiple peer-reviewed scientific articles. He speaks for the U.S. Dairy Council, delivers numerous speaking engagements at various conferences. He's sponsored by Scivation, Outwork Apparel. He's a scientific consultant for Scivation. He's had 2 video series on bodybuilding.com, and he's released 2 successful DVDs, which are available on numerous websites. He's a media host for bodybuilding.com's live commentary and press coverage at events like the Arnold Classic and the Mr. Olympia. He runs natural bodybuilding VIP camps, touring the US, Australia, and the UK, to name a few countries, to deliver his messages on diet and training. He co-promotes a natural bodybuilding show in Tampa, just had a baby boy named Robert. He started the BioLayne Foundation to help exercise science and sports nutrition students fund their education. He is a co-host on Muscle College Radio, and he has an awesome YouTube channel, which is BioLayne. I suggest you go there and check out numerous videos he has on various topics. And I would say he's one of the most liked people in the industry because he's real, he's beyond helpful, just a super dude. And so welcome to the show, Dr. Layne Norton.
I really appreciate it. Don't always feel like the most liked guy out there, but I do appreciate the thought.
No worries. So obviously you've been interviewed on numerous, podcasts and shows, and you're out and about. And I think a lot of people have seen your, recent developments on these areas: metabolic adaptation, metabolic damage, reverse dieting. I'd say areas that you've really made a nice initiative in, just kind of dispelling some of the myths in the bodybuilding and fitness industry and getting people more aware of what truly works and, how the body adapts and things. And there's so many topics that we could discuss, but I actually wanted to kind of take a little bit different of a spin and kind of go, behind the scenes and maybe a little more into your lifestyle, some questions that perhaps some of your followers might be interested in that they haven't heard you discuss before. And so I guess I'll start by saying, with all the things I just mentioned, prepping clients, camps, bodybuilding.com coverage, consulting, making your movies, training just, for your own enjoyment, competing, things like that. You have your hand in so many things and you wear so many hats. How about just kind of telling us your thoughts on all those, which you enjoy the most, and what kind of makes you tick, if you will?
Well, I enjoy all of it. Honestly, probably one of the things I enjoy the least is writing. I really have to, it's like pulling teeth to get me to write. And it's not so much that I do. I just, for some reason, I just don't enjoy it that much anymore. Probably a lot of it has to do with, I feel like there's only so many topics to write about, And so sometimes it can feel like I'm really pushing to make it, because I always want to make my articles, pretty original, pretty in depth, and pretty, not just something that's been kind of remade over and over. And so that can be difficult to kind of, like, how many times can you write about protein? You know what I mean? Like, how many times can you write about carbs, et cetera, et cetera? Even though there's, new interesting data coming out all the time, conveying that into a palatable outcome for most people means simplifying it. And when you simplify it, there's only so many ways you can do it. So writing is probably my least favorite, but, I love coaching people. That's probably my most favorite thing. I really enjoy that. I really enjoy doing the commentary for bodybuilding.com. I really enjoy, going to shows, going to expos, meeting fans, those sorts of things. Those are awesome. Really enjoy that. But, I've gotten a lot of people say, well, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And, I pretty much operate at capacity or near it. And, if I was going to do one of those things, I'm very strict on how many people I take on at a time, because I would never want to be kind of one of these coaches that's known for volume rather than quality. And so, with regards to that, if I was going to write a book or I was going to do something else, I'd really have to take on a lot less clients. And it's really hard for me, one, because I love coaching people, and two, because there's so many people I want to help. I get a lot of emails from people and stories and, kind of the hardships they've been through, that sort of thing. So I really do want to help a lot of people. So it can be difficult to, turn people down, that sort of thing. But, coaching and then the camps we put on are always an absolute blast. If they didn't take so much time and energy, I would do them all year round. But they are definitely just a completely different level. And I attribute that to the people we bring in. Our experts and pros we bring in are just some of those high quality people you could ever hope to meet. Many of them, so you know what I'm talking about.
Definitely. Additionally, with your business, BioLayne, it seems like you have brought in, a couple of assistants and different people to help you out. It's funny, you got to a point where you said you were so inundated with email, just people, when you made some of your, critical kind of initial posts regarding some of these topics I mentioned at the beginning, metabolic damage and things. You just said, you were inundated with emails and different things. And so I know, like you said, it's like you want to help everyone, and it just can be almost overwhelming when you get to the position you're at. And so maybe talk to our listeners about kind of going through that process, how you decide when it was time to bring on assistants, how to pick the right people, what things have to be just Layne Norton and what things can be done by someone else, and how someone does that with their fitness business and things.
Excellent question. I mean, the metabolic damage stuff really kind of changed things. And I just didn't realize how many people were going through or had been on, super low calorie diets, and then had massive weight regain, and then, kind of tried to diet through it, and then, only to kind of end up in a worse place over time. And, I'm not going to sit here and harp on the metabolic adaptation stuff, because Lord knows I've put enough information out there about it and talked enough about it. But, I was getting, I think I put that video out in like December or January of 2012, I think it was. Maybe it was a little bit before that. And I probably started getting, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50 emails a day just on that topic, or people who had been, through a really bad coaching situation. And one day I remember it got crazy. It was like, I had like over 50 requests from people who were interested in my pricing and wanted to become clients. I mean, a good problem to have, but still a problem. I mean, I was spending, because I don't just, if I'm not, I mean, I'm very picky about how I screen my clients. I want to make sure they're going to be a good fit. I used to take on kind of anybody, but I've learned over time that, some people, one, aren't going to be a good fit for me, and that doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. The certain coach and athlete relationships just don't work. You know what I mean? It's the same in any sport. And I try to recognize those types of personalities and refer them to other people that will be able to help them. And the other thing is, by referring them out, I was really trying to get them, good, or a lot of times too is, it might be like somebody who's a beginner will come to me, or somebody who, I'm not going to, it's not that I don't want to work with teenagers, but, I'll be frank with how much I charge. I just don't think it's a good idea for them to hire me most times,
Sure.
And so I'll typically, try to refer them to other people who I trust who are, more affordable, because I'm not just interested in taking people's money, and I know I'm expensive. So I refer out a lot of people. Well, just referring people, just, telling them, hey, maybe this coach is good for you, that coach is good for you, that sort of thing, and not just, ignoring them. That was taking an hour or two of my time a day. And so just referring people out, I was just like, and just screening clients. Like I would ask them, when I'm going through the process of asking somebody questions, and, maybe we get 4, 5, 6 emails deep, and I decide, well, this isn't going to be a great situation. And it ends up, I've spent that time, and I don't want to say I've wasted that time, but it's not going to make me income,
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to hire. Actually, what happened was I put out on Twitter that, I'd always taken great pride in answering every single email I've ever had. And I got to the point where I posted on Facebook. I said, look, if you're not a client, I can't promise I'm going to answer your email. If it's something I've answered a bunch of times, if you ask me a question about fat, or you ask me, a question about, protein, or which cardio I like best, or what I think of, carb backloading, or whatever, whatever the hot thing is, I may just not answer, just because I've answered it so many times. And I really felt bad about that. And Sohee Lee, who I knew from working with her on an article like a year before that, emailed me and basically said, you need to let me help you because you need help. Don't worry about paying me. I just want to help you. And, I'm the kind of person that I don't believe in slave labor. I believe people, the fact that she said she didn't want me to pay her made me want to pay her more, because, somebody who's committed to like a cause, who believes in what I'm trying to do in terms of, clients and, doing the right thing and running my business with integrity, I want them on board. So, we kind of interviewed her, me and my wife, over Skype, and we kind of hashed out responsibilities. And what we figured the best thing for her to do was kind of be in the background and take care of a lot of the stuff that, takes away time for me. So she doesn't answer any client emails. I answer all my client emails. What she does is she basically she screens a lot of my clients. So if people come to us and they're interested, she'll kind of help screen people that might be good fits for me. Or if I'm totally full, she'll just refer everybody out to somebody else. So she's been invaluable for that. And then I hired Ben Escrow, who's a great coach in his own right. Actually, Sohee and Ben are both great coaches in their own right. And actually, now that I mentioned it, Sohee and I are actually working on a series of ebooks. And I'll be frank, she's basically writing them and I'm proofreading. And she's using kind of these concepts and a lot of my video logs to put together these ebooks. And she's a fantastic writer, which is great because she likes writing and I don't.
Yeah,
So it works out well. But anyway, I hired Ben Escrow not to be an assistant, but to kind of oversee my programming, because I'm a human like anybody else. And I kind of look at, when I put together programs, I look at it like if you're writing a review paper or you're writing an article, yes, you should proofread it yourself, but you should also have somebody else proofread it, right? Because there's certain things that you've seen so many times that you're just not going to catch them. It just looks like a blank page to you. So I hired him. So what he does is he looks over my plans. He looks over the clients I have, the questionnaire, because I trust him. I think he's one of the best coaches out there that that very few people know about. And so what he does is he goes over my plans. He says, okay, and usually he sends it right back and says, this looks good to go, send it on over. But he has caught mistakes before. I'm human. I make mistakes. As simple as, I've done stupid stuff. Like I forgot, I have a template that I fill in with, specific information for each client, but I had forgotten to clear out one of my previous client's name. And so I put together this whole new plan for my new client. And it was their plan. Everything was specific to them, but it had the other person's name on it, right? So they get their plan and they're like, what's this? So Ben actually caught one of those, and it was very nice, saved me a lot of embarrassment, even though I'm talking about it now. But, I'm human like anybody else. And I guess, maybe what's a little bit different about me is I'm not afraid to admit that I make mistakes. I'm not one of these people who, holds themselves out there as all knowing and, infallible. I definitely make mistakes. I just try to, be honest about them and limit them as much as I can. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I guess in a way I'm proud of myself because I can handle that criticism. Not many people would hire someone to oversee themselves, I guess.
Sure. No, I think a really important message for the listeners that you brought up is kind of leveraging your strengths. So, recognizing that there's various people that like to do various things and realizing that ultimately you're going to shine more and, provide more value to your clients by limiting yourself, I guess, a little bit to the things that you're really good at and then utilizing other strengths to complement you and just create an overall good experience for the client, wouldn't you say?
That's the job of any good manager, right? Like
Yep.
If you're running any kind of business, you need to pick out what your team's strengths and weaknesses are and play to their strengths and try to mitigate their weaknesses. So that includes me. I used to be a one-man show, and there are just some things I'm just not good at.
Oh, for sure. That's awesome. And great that you're humble to admit that. And so along those lines, with all you got going on, I guess questions probably people would come up with is, how do you find time to, have some lane time, if you will, and train the way that you want and be able to live this lifestyle. And then I guess with that, maybe dovetail a little bit into, like you said, about how, you're admitting that, your opinions change or that you don't always know everything. And so how that expands in your training, because you'll have people, right, that will be like, oh, well, you said this 3 years ago or whatever. And just maybe touch on those topics a little.
Well, the answer is I really haven't figured it all out yet. Training wise, I don't look at that, I guess maybe the way a lot of people do. I look at training as part of my work because even though it's not necessarily directly making me money, it's part of the overall package of what makes me stand out. So I think walking the walk is an important thing. So, I kind of look at those, 2 hours or so or 2 or 3 hours and I'm at the gym as, something that goes towards work. With regard to, when do I find lane time? I don't find a whole lot of it. I mean, typically I'm a pretty late worker, so I'll work till like 1 a.m. and I'll wake up, around 9, something like that. And, I give full props to my wife. She's usually handling Robert in the morning, getting him ready, that sort of thing. If he wakes up in the middle of the night, I'll usually take him and give him a bottle. But
down a protein shake at the same time.
Yeah, and but she's handling 65%, 70% of childcare. I pitch in when I can, but it's certainly she's doing a lot more than me. But we hired a nanny, which definitely helps because that gives her some free time as well. I'll get up, I'll have breakfast, and I'll get started usually somewhere around 10:30 after hanging out with Isabel and Robert for a little while. And, I'll start on my work and I'll work probably straight till like 3 or 4 o'clock. And I'll start getting ready for the gym, get in the gym around 5 or 6, and I'll be there till, 8:30, get home, we'll have dinner, kiss Robert goodnight. And then we'll, me and Isabel will sit down and watch TV for a little while. And then I'll pretty much work till I go to sleep. Now, that also doesn't take into account the fact that, I'm texting and I'm, answering emails and all that kind of stuff. I mean, pretty consistently throughout the day. So even if I'm out running errands, that sort of thing, if I'm waiting in line at the store, I'm, checking my email, getting stuff back. I'm kind of, I guess it's kind of a bad habit that I'm obsessively checking my email, but I'm really very, I guess, anal about trying to get back to people as fast as possible. I always tell people, I'll always get back to you within 24 hours. Never less than that. Never. Unless there is. I don't even think it was less than that when it was, Robert was being born. Maybe it was like a little bit more than that, but there's very few situations where I'm not getting back to somebody within 24 hours. As far as changing my opinions over time, I mean, I just think that's being a good scientist, I think there was somebody that said back in the 1800s, something to the effect of, there was a scientist that said, well, everything that can be invented has already been invented. And, now he looks pretty foolish, but if you were living back then, you it maybe wouldn't seem so foolish. Like right now, what would you say else could be invented? Well, most people like me, well, we can't come up with something, but I'm not going to sit here and say everything that can be invented has already been invented, right? Because history has shown us that human ingenuity is extremely high. But it's kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, well, if you said, science back then was the end all be all, you look pretty foolish now. I mean, when Watson and Crick proposed DNA, and when the scientist who did it, when he proposed the ATP pump, he was basically laughed out of the room when he suggested that it was a pump and a hydrogen ion gradient that drove ATP production. He was essentially laughed out of the room. Jokes on them,
Sure.
So I think it's important to, we form hypothesis, and a lot of times I think we get caught up in, trying to be so right all the time. But one of the most interesting parts of my PhD was something I was wrong on, the refractory phenomenon. I figured when we ran a time course of muscle protein synthesis, just however long plasma leucine was elevated would be how long muscle protein synthesis was elevated. And I ran that data several times because it didn't make any sense to me. And eventually Dr. Layman brought me into his office, and it was one of the best lessons I ever had as a scientist. I said, well, this isn't right. This data is wrong. And he's like, well, is your technique bad? And I'm like, well, no, I don't think so. And he's like, well, was the experiment done poorly? And I was like, no, I think it went pretty smooth. He's like, well, then, is your standard error bad? And I was like, no, they're pretty tight error bars. He's like, well, then what makes you think it's going to be any different when you run it again? I was like, I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. He said, well, maybe you should stop trying to make the data fit your hypothesis, and you should change your hypothesis to fit the data. And that was probably the single best piece of advice I've ever gotten as a scientist. I think that if you continue to defend an opinion in the face of overwhelming evidence, or a hypothesis in the face of an overwhelming evidence, you're not a scientist, you're a politician.
I think that's invaluable, because that really speaks to this idea of these things that you're talking about, metabolic adaptation and the damage and things that occurs, right? Because it's one of those scenarios where sometimes the things that go on don't make sense, right? Someone eats more calories than you would think they would need for maintenance and they don't gain weight, or someone eats hardly any calories and they do gain weight because they've done things to their metabolism or whatnot. And like you say, that doesn't make sense in theory, but yet it's happening. So you need to adjust and deal with the circumstances at hand. And I'm sure that's probably been your experience.
Yeah, I got some criticism for it because people say, well, there are no studies on metabolic damage. Well, no, metabolic damage is just kind of a pop term. You know what I mean? But I mean, there's tons of studies on weight regain and how, there's actually just a study just done recently that showed that cycling, like weight cycling, like if you go up and down, like yo-yo dieting, was essentially worse than just chronic overfeeding, even when calories were consistent across groups, that the group that yo-yo dieted gained more body fat than the group that just chronically overate. So there are mechanisms out there that need to explain that. And I think the data is there. It's maybe not, there's not one study that's going to come out and say, well, this is why, you have this overall effect. But if you look at the patterns are there, buried in the data. And I've tried to bring that out, and make that more apparent. And, it's one of those things that I noticed anecdotally first, that just people were on very low calories and not, not getting, some people were on very low calories and not making much progress at all. And it just didn't make any sense. I mean, how can somebody who's on 1,000 calories a day doing, an hour and a half of cardio not make any progress? It just didn't make any sense. And so I got some criticism about that. People said, well, these people are just lying. They're underreporting, that sort of thing. And, I would have bought that probably 6-7 years ago, but I've worked with so many people. The people I work with are so motivated and so driven and so just hyper obsessive about wanting to get to a goal that I'm pretty sure they would eat absolutely nothing if I told them to. And so I had to kind of look at it and say, okay, well, either everyone is lying to me, all these people, hundreds of people are lying to me, or there's something else going on here. And so I kind of, I'm not comparing myself to Isaac Newton by any stretch of the imagination, but let's take Newton for example. When he saw the apple fall from the tree and said, why does that happen? Did he get criticized because there was no study in PubMed that told him that, gravity existed? No, it was a hypothesis. He tested that hypothesis and, came up with data to support it. So that's the crux of the scientific method. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's anybody who's done any sort of coaching or been around even the bodybuilding community or the fitness community for a time, everybody knows that person who does really low calories all the time and goes crazy on the cardio and looks the same or worse. You know what I mean? So yeah, I guess it's just, but most of the criticism has been from, quite honestly, just really bad coaches who are upset at me because I've pointed out these kind of, let's just say, shortcomings in their services. And, they're kind of looking for a way to criticize me, to poke holes in it. And that's fine. They're entitled to do that. But what I always tell is, you can say whatever you want, that I made all this up or that I'm lying or et cetera, et cetera. But there's tons of people who have had these issues occur. And if when they're reading this stuff, are they going to say, oh, yeah, I never thought of it that way. I must just be full of crap. This never happened to me. No, they're going to be like, no, this person's full of crap because I know this thing happened to me. So that's kind of how I look at it. And we're working on trying to actually set, some studies up looking at, kind of chronic metabolic adaptation and also, reverse dieting, those sorts of things. Because I do think, that we need to do, more thorough research. But, it's just, most people don't understand how long it is from inception of an idea to testing that idea to gathering that data to actual publication. It can be 5 to 10 years.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. For any of the listeners, I assume many of you are familiar with these concepts we're discussing, but if you're not, again, highly recommend you head over to the Layne YouTube channel and just follow along. Layne puts out regular logs that touch on a lot of these kind of cutting edge topics and has some awesome insight to share. And so I bet many of our listeners are probably curious, how are you applying this currently in your own training? Because obviously you've done an excellent job educating others, working with your clients, et cetera. But, for someone that wants to know, like, how do you slowly build up your metabolism? What are you doing to, add calories in the way that you're discussing in your videos? What's your current training method? Again, coming back to that idea that you've evolved over time. A lot of people know you for the fat style of training, power hypertrophy adaptive training. For those of you that are not familiar, kind of a mix of traditional hypertrophy training with some strength training. And so maybe talk a little bit about what's going on in your world currently. How are you training? How are you eating? And applying all these awesome concepts that you're educating others on.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I did is I'm always trying to add more. Like if I'm in the off season, and even if I'm happy with my body fat and I'm, relatively high calorie, I'm always trying to slowly add more calories in because, if you're maintaining your weight on a higher calorie intake, it's just going to make it that much easier when you go to diet down for a show. I always use the example of, I think your metabolic rate is kind of your controls your long-term fat loss and body composition potential. And you've really got to take care of that. You really got to maximize that. So I really try to get my metabolic rate as high as I possibly can. Now, not everybody's going to be able to be somebody who we call them a macronator, who can eat, get to the point where they're eating 700 grams of carbs a day and maintain their weight on that. Not everybody's going to be able to do that. But, I'm right around, I was up to around, 500 grams of carbs a day, maintaining my weight. And, even then I'm still trying to add, a little more here, a little more there, pretty slow, just to kind of try and limit body fat gain and put on, a little bit more into my metabolism, because I understand that, the faster my metabolism is going in the off season, the easier it's going to be diet down as contest approaches. So yeah, I'm always doing that. And as far as training goes, it's funny because I've done, the power hypertrophy, and I've done, Shiko, and I've done Smolov, and I've done, DUP and all these different sorts of periodization. And people will go, well, why are you doing that now? Is that better than fat? Is that better than this? Is that better than that? It's like, you're thinking of things the wrong way. These are all tools in a toolbox. And, depending on what you're going after, some tools are better than other tools. And also, it's like if you were, this is probably a poor comparison, but if you were just a little kid, would you give a little kid, a full-sized, sledgehammer to work on something with? No, you'd start them out with something smaller, and that's the thing, you don't need to, if you're a beginner, you don't need to jump up right to squatting 4 times a week, in a Smolov style, program. That's overkill. You're going to be able to make gains on way less volume than that. So, I tell people it's not that one program is better than another. It's just, for different training statuses and different points in your lifting career, one program may make more sense than another one.
Mm-hmm. So what are you currently running? And is that something where you have future powerlifting meets in mind, or perhaps maybe you're thinking of stepping on stage again at some point? Or
well, I am pretty deep into a powerlifting focused cycle. So I'm doing like daily undulating periodization with a little bit of auto regulation mixed in there. And auto regulation basically means that, each week you're kind of testing, whether it be with reps or a 1 rep max, kind of where you're at. And then you use that to kind of set up your next week, your next microcycle. in terms of how hard you're going to go. But, I do want to do Raw Nationals in July. That's kind of my immediate goal. I would love to step back on stage, but, bodybuilding really requires a whole nother level of commitment, a whole nother level of, time even. And it's just very hard when I'm traveling out of the country, 3-4 times a year, traveling all around the country when I'm here. And, anything extra is basically either going to take away from business or family. And so, it gets to the point where it's hard to commit to a 20, 24 week prep. Now, obviously there are people out there who have kids, who have demanding jobs, who do this prep and get it done. Brian Whitaker comes to mind. But everybody's a different person, and I just don't know. My last time I dieted down for a show, it took a lot out of me. It took a long time to recover too. And, I'm just not sure I'm ready to do that again. So, I'm sure that fire will come back. I really enjoy training. I'm still training very hard. But, that fire to do the long diet and compete, when that comes back, I'll consider it. And maybe that's later this year. I've definitely been getting a little bit more of the bug, but maybe that's next year. So we'll just have to see.
Sure. So how about coming back to your diets? You mentioned constantly trying to, add a little bit more food in. And I know previously in some of your content that I've watched, you discussed this concept of kind of running like a short bulking or gaining phase and then, cutting for a couple of weeks. And so how do you frame that now in terms of, again, that context you mentioned where you don't want to yo-yo your weight too much, but obviously I think done in a conservative manner like you probably have in the past, perhaps that gives you a chance to kind of ward off body fat gain. Are you still doing that, or are you consistently?
That's a good question, because I have had a lot of people say, well, you recommended weight cycling. Isn't that going to cause metabolic damage? All these little short mini cuts. And no, that's not, the level of metabolic adaptation you see is proportional to the duration of the restriction and the severity of the restriction. So 2 weeks of a minus 500 kcal deficit is not going to cause you metabolic problems. Okay. 2 or 3 weeks of a mini cut like that. Will 6 months of 1,000 calories a day cause you problems? Oh yeah, absolutely. But there's a big difference, right? A lot of people don't understand kind of the difference between those two. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I think those diet cycles, I still do employ them some, but I think they're probably most useful for somebody who is either one has kind of maxed out their metabolic rate. They know, hey, if I get much above, let's say for me, 500 grams of carbs per day, I don't really I just start putting on weight kind of linearly, right? So that's kind of my ceiling, my metabolic ceiling. So maybe once you're there, then you start doing some cycling to keep yourself leaner as you try to, slowly add weight. Or maybe if you're a beginner, or, well, I don't know if I want to say beginner, but if you're kind of intermediate, that sort of thing, you're looking to add mass, but you want to keep, body fat gain to a minute. Part of it is different for me too, because I don't want to say I'm never going to gain any more muscle in my life, because I think I will, but for somebody who's been training 15 years of their life, it's I'm not going to go out and put on 5 pounds in a year. It's just not going to happen, not naturally. And so, I'm looking at ounces of muscle gain per year. So I've really gotten way less aggressive when I quote unquote bulk. You know what I mean? I'm more focused on, optimizing my metabolic rate. So when I diet down, I can retain more muscle, because that's a net gain, right? If you maintain more muscle, you still have more muscle. So that becomes a little bit more my focus. I still think that there is room in the toolbox for that tool, right? It just depends on the situation.
Sure. So how about looking at other things you maybe do? I think, everyone probably feels they've heard you talk about your nutrition habits or your exercise habits. Are there any other things that maybe people would be surprised, like, I don't know, in regards to maybe like mobility work or stretching work or recovery work or visualization, or maybe even like superstitions you have or different things like that? How about some of those things?
Oh, as far as training stuff, well, I guess
the secrets.
Well, I don't do near as much mobility work as I probably should. I will go out and be honest with that. I do spend a significant amount of time doing submaximal sets. Like for example, if I'm working up to 500 pounds for a working set, I'll just tell you, like for example, how I warm up at a meet. If I'm going to squat 600 something pounds, my first warm up set will be 135 for 10, and then I'll do 205 for 8, and then I'll do 275 for 5. And then I'll do 340 for 3, 410 for 1, 480 for 1, and then I'll maybe take my first attempt at like 550, right? So there's a lot of submaximal sets that go into that. And I think that helps me, but I definitely don't do as much mobility work as I probably should. And part of that just boils down to time issues. It's like, okay, do I spend another 20 minutes with Robert, or do I spend 20 minutes, opening up my hips? So it's not an excuse, but it's just kind of the practical, pragmatic decision I make. As far as like superstitions, I wouldn't say I'm super superstitious. Kind of sounds funny, but I definitely like, a certain bar when I squat. When I'm in the gym, when I'm in my home gym, I like a certain bar. I like, to wear certain clothes. I like, certain songs when I'm lifting, for certain lifts. So those would, I guess, kind of be my superstitions. I have certain songs I listen to when I'm deadlifting, and those may not work well when I'm bench pressing, and vice versa. So I think as far as how I set up lifts and all that sort of stuff, I try to be exactly the same every single time. I mean, like my ritual before I lift, I try to be exactly the same every single time for each lift, right? Mm-hmm. Because look at any Major League Baseball player. Look at a pitcher. He has the exact same stuff, like fidgets he does before he steps. Look at Nomar Garciaparra. Remember, he used to have that weird thing with his batting gloves? Mm-hmm. But he did that every single time before he got in the batter's box. That was just like his mental cue to get ready. That's just something that made him comfortable. And if you look at every major league hitter, they all do the exact same thing. It's a ritual before they get in there, because those are their mental cues getting them ready to do what they need to do.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was recently actually just talking on a episode just the other day about like how I have my habits and my certain music that I go through and different things. And I don't know about you, but I found that it helps me a lot if I'm traveling or overseas or in a different environment or whatever it may be. If I still have some of those things consistent, I find that my body recognizes those cues and I can kind of get in the groove. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing or.
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it.
Nice. And so with you kind of going overseas and doing all these different things, let's transition back to all these different things you're doing overseas. It's just something, I guess, in a way I kind of admire, because it takes a lot out of you. It's a big sacrifice on your part to benefit so many other people, to spread your message in other parts of the world and things like that. So maybe discuss a little bit about, for other people that are, I guess, kind of following along a similar trajectory, or maybe starting to gain a following and wanting to reach out and help more people, and how you find that balance, I guess, or make those sacrifices to benefit others.
Well, I mean, first off, I get paid pretty well for those camps, so, I can't act like it's just me doing charity work. But, at the same time, it is, I'm away from my family a lot of times, that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's hard. I mean, when you love it, and if I, for example, if I was a single guy, I'd probably be traveling all, around the world all the time, but I just, it gets to the point where it's like, okay, I've got to be reasonable about it. But as far as, people like, what do you want to do to build up the following? Where do you want to go with it? I mean, I'll give you a story. When I was first getting into this, my first coach was Dr. Joe Klimzetsky, and Dr. Joe had me into his office. He's prepping me for my first show, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm like 19 years old, and I got into his office, and I opened up his door, and we're talking, and he, I was just like, man, this guy has got it, right? Like, this is so cool. Like, he coaches bodybuilding for a living. Like, how cool is that, right? So I just kind of blurted out, like, halfway through our meeting, I want to do what you do. And he told me later, he was like, yeah, sure, kid, because he had worked, 10, 15 years to build what he had at that time, And so, but, he told me later, he's like, but by God, he's like, you went out and did it. So, let me put it to you this way. If you want to be, successful kind of on another level, if you want to, be a groundswell, if you, want to start a movement, that sort of thing, you can do it, but you have to be willing to work harder than everybody else next to you. You've really you're going to have to make sacrifices. And, like when I was in college, a lot of my friends would be out partying and that sort of stuff, and I'd be on forums answering questions or writing articles and, that sort of thing. I was in graduate school. I would be in the lab, 10 o'clock at night running an assay. And while the assay was running, I had 30 spare minutes. I was writing an article or answering emails or, writing a blog post. It never stops. You know what I mean? Like I'm always, if I have, unless I'm on vacation, if I have downtime, I'm like, okay, what can I be doing right now? Like I feel if I love playing video games, like when I get the chance, Mass Effect is like one of my favorite game series. I love playing that game, but if I play for like, a lot of people will sit down, they'll play for like 8 hours, like get lost in it. Man, if I play for more than like an hour or 2 hours, I'm just like, okay, I really just wasted this time. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't do things you like to do, but everybody only gets one life you can either be, a vapor, or you can, try to build a legacy. And for me, it's just not a question of which one it's going to be. Unless a man takes on more than he can possibly do, he will never do all he possibly can. And I think that's extremely true. Unless if you're not feeling overwhelmed at certain points, you're not going to be successful. I always tell people, you're going to have some stress. If you have no stress, you're probably a loser, or, you don't care about much.
Sure. No, I think I've heard the saying that if you're saying yes to something, that means you're saying no to something else. Right. And so along those lines, maybe tell some of our listeners about perhaps opportunities that have come across your path. I've heard you say multiple times, you're offered, supplement contracts and different things all the time. And maybe just as a teaching point for people, perhaps maybe you can't even give specific examples, but along the lines of opportunities and kind of bright, shiny, glowing objects like that you've had to turn down in the past, and maybe even some insight on times where you did that and maybe it actually would have been a good thing and you regretted it later, or things where like afterwards you're like, phew, I'm so glad I didn't do that. Yeah.
Well, as far as like opportunities, I can't really give specifics because obviously I don't want to name companies or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like that's just not my style. And it's not that they were bad companies either, but I'll give you an example. When I was into 3 years, 2.5, 3 years into graduate school. And actually this was like, it was almost like it was put there to test me and how bad I wanted my PhD, because things were going terribly in grad school. I was failing. One thing after another was failing. It just like everything wasn't working. I was so enormously frustrated. I'd come home like literally in tears to Isabel because I was like I would just have failure after failure. Yeah. And it was just incredibly frustrating. And I got this email. These people were starting a supplement company, and they had good investors, all this sort of stuff. And they're like, look, you're very popular, in the bodybuilding community. We would love to have you come on and be the chief scientific officer, and we would pay you $80,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And for a student in graduate school, living on, just above the poverty line, that was 5 times more money than I'd ever made in my life. And, it was very, especially at that time, being very frustrated. It was very difficult to turn down. But I turned it down because I thought, if I'm getting that opportunity now, I will get, other opportunities later. And, I was in, talks with a really, even after I graduated, I was in talks with a really, really, really big company, not a supplement company, but a website. I mean, people could probably know what I'm talking about, but a huge company. And, they wanted to, bring me to their headquarters and basically make me their science guy, like their science editor. But, and it wasn't that they gave me a bad offer or anything like that. They gave me a great offer, and it was really difficult to turn down. But I love working for myself. I wanted to build my own brand. I wanted to, be the master of my own destiny. And, it actually ends up I made the right decision in those aspects. I mean, I have to say I've gotten kind of pretty lucky following my gut. I really don't have a lot of things I regret. I will say the only thing that jumps out at me that I kind of regret, it's actually not anything. It was just a client that I didn't take on. This person contacted me, and they're actually on my approved coaches list. I'll just go ahead and say who it is. It was John Hollywood. And we had a little bit of go around on the forums before. He's kind of sarcastic and a smart ass on the forums. And he had said some kind of negative things about me. And it wasn't that I wasn't taking him on because I didn't, I wanted to get back at him. I just wasn't sure. To be quite frank with you, I just didn't trust him at the time. And I said, I want to refer you to some other people. And I did that. And, ever since then, we've had a pretty good relationship, actually, even though he never ended up working with me. And now he's actually on our approved coaches list because he's been coaching people and having a lot of success. And he seems to understand the principles that I try to teach and puts those out there and seems to do a good job for his clients. So, that's something I kind of regret. was not working with him, because looking back, I think he'd been a good client. So that was one thing I kind of regretted. But, I didn't do it with ill intentions or anything like that. It was just, I made a judgment call, and it ended up, I thought the guy was going to be a jackass, and I had the wrong opinion. I was wrong about him. You know what I mean?
Sure. No, that's cool that you're humble enough to admit that, as well as, like you said, that, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, if you will, going through grad school. And like you said, there were times where you're really down and out. And I think sometimes people have this delusion, when they see someone like you, they think, oh, everything Layne touches turns to gold, and, complete magic, if you will. And so obviously you've, shared the struggle that a lot of people don't see behind the scenes, but
an overnight success over 10 years.
Yeah. And so I think you probably have still, though, a lot of cool things that you're waiting to touch that are going to turn to gold. Is there anything you can maybe leak or tease us with in terms of something that's coming in the future, or maybe even like a close friend or researcher that's got something really neat coming out?
Yeah, I mean, we have tons of stuff coming up. I mean, sky is really the limit. Like I said, Sohi and I are working on a series of ebooks. The first one's going to be on reverse dieting. She has one out right now that really I didn't have a whole lot of involvement with, but it's great. It's called How to Count Macros. And in my opinion, it's the best ebook out there about how to count macros, the concepts behind it, why it's important. For people who aren't familiar with it, how to implement it. Because some of us who've been doing this for years are like, okay, why do I need an ebook to tell me how to count macros? Well, maybe you don't. But for people who are newer into it, or people who are wondering, well, why would I do that? I just eat my meal plan. It'd help you understand why it's important for you. The next book's going to be on reverse dieting, and I think it's really going to be a great book, and I'm helping her write that, so we're co-writing that. And yeah, we have a lot of things in the pipe. We're actually starting up a podcast. Muscle College Radio, I'm afraid, is over. We're just not going to be able to get that back up for multiple reasons I don't want to get into. But I'm really excited about this new podcast. It's going to be called Physique Science, and it's going to be myself and Sohi, and we're going to have a lot of top experts as guests. I mean, really, really, really cool people. We're going to try and make it, science-based, but relatable to even the average person. So we're going to try and take complex science and break it down so that even your average person can get some quality information from it. And then, we're doing camps all over the world, Australia, the UK. We have the team we've assembled for our VIP camps, Ben Escrow, Brooke Erickson, Paul Ravella, Ryan Doris, just, all these people. It's just, if people, I can't possibly describe to you what that's like. You'd have to ask somebody who's been to one of those camps. But we had pretty much every person either tell us one of two things. This was the best weekend of my life, barring, birth of a child or wedding or something like that. This is the best weekend of my life, or this changed my life. We've had a lot of people who went to our camps now go and do like science degrees or that sort of thing. And so, that's super cool. So, I mean, the goal is changing lives. That's the goal. So we're going to keep hammering at that. So I'm sure there's going to be more things that come up. I have a opportunity right now that it's not done, but if it does go through, will take us into the stratosphere. I mean, completely next level. And so yeah, I'm always working, always looking for the next thing to get more good information out there.
That's awesome. No, I'm sure there's nothing but good things in the future. How do you, just quickly, I guess, as we get ready to close, how do you balance kind of all these things in terms of, when you're involved with multiple companies, multiple speaking gigs, multiple things? What are maybe some advice and insight to someone on how they don't burn any bridges and kind of keep everyone happy, but at the same point also recognize that you can't make everyone happy?
Well, first off, I'm always, I've done things with other companies, and first off, it's a credit to some of the people I work with, like Scivation. They've always been extremely open to me doing a lot of different things, and sometimes even in that case with other supplement companies, not anything in terms of a sponsorship, but like we've had other supplement companies sponsor different events we've done and that sort of thing, and then they've been cool with it, whereas they could have been like, well, we don't want any other sponsor sponsoring this event, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a testament to kind of the people I've surrounded myself with. But I don't endorse companies I don't believe in. I don't align myself with people who I think have shady business ethics. And if I find out somebody has shady business ethics or the way they do things, I discard them extremely quickly. And I've had to do that a couple times. But I think that, I guess that would be like one of the things I would say is like, you got to be around people who are going to bring you up, and that means people with a lot of integrity and who will do the right thing over money. And because I truly believe that doing the right thing in the long run makes you more money, because you once your reputation, I mean, people know if I say I'm going to do something, they know they can take that to the bank. There's not anybody say, well, maybe Layne's going to get this done. Maybe he's going to do that. No, if I say I'm going to do something, it's already done. Like it's just a matter of time, And so having that kind of reputation, there's no monetary value you can put on that, because over time that just makes you so much more money. So I guess what I would tell people is like, value your reputation, especially if you're in business for yourself, because your reputation is everything. You seriously cannot put a money value on that, because you can buy anything back, but you can't buy back your reputation. I've had several pyramid schemes come to me and say, hey, just endorse this thing, and we will give you, 2% of all our sales, or, 2% of any sales referred to. I mean, realistically, it could have made me tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not putting my name behind that, because I'll make enough money in my life, but I'm not willing to give up my name for something I don't believe in. So I guess that's what I'd say to people, grow your business slow and retain the rights to your name. And what I mean by that is like, I'm not an employee of any other company. I guess I'm not. I guess it depends on your person. Not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur, and that's not a bad thing. It takes all different types to make the world go round. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to own your own thing, don't be afraid to be a 1099 for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a 1099 for probably a dozen different companies in terms of I'm an independent contractor, So I don't have a guaranteed income, but I trust my ability to go and kill it, and that's why I'm not worried.
Gotcha. No, I think it's that ability and confidence to take those risks sometimes pays dividends as well, and is why you're doing all the awesome things you're doing. So,
well, if there is no risk, then there is no reward. It's people will tell you, oh, you can do this. It's risk free and the rewards are huge. That's bunk. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's like telling somebody, yeah, you can get huge if you only train a half an hour every day. Well, no. Or if you only train a half hour 3 times a week, right? Mm-hmm. Well, no, it's not going to happen. You're what you get out of it is going to be proportional to what you put into it.
Very true. Very true. So let's close quickly. What's a random thing that many people may not know about you that would surprise them? Kind of an interesting factoid.
Well, I guess that most people, if you follow me on Instagram or whatever, I'm a big firearms enthusiast. So I go shooting pretty much every week. I'm sure I just alienated half the listeners because that seems to be a very political thing. But I grew up shooting with my dad. We lived in Indiana, and that was one of the things we used to do for fun. And so I grew up in the outdoors, shooting, fishing, those sorts of things. Even though nobody would ever mistake me for a country boy, I'm definitely not. But yeah, I love to do that. Some of my favorite things are going to take tactical carbine classes or pistol classes, just because that's fun for me. That's like, going out in the golf range for me. It's just, it sounds weird, but it's actually relaxing for me. And then I guess another thing people may not know about me is I'm a big fantasy football buff. So during football season, like on game day, I'm like on the couch in front of NFL Red Zone with my laptop open, checking all the stats. In between answering emails.
So how do you settle the Colts versus Bucks debate, given your doing grad school where you did, and then now being down in Tampa?
I'm a fan of both, and I guess I'm fortunate because one's in the AFC, one is in the NFC, and the likelihood that either will ever meet is very, very low. They meet, I think, like once every 8 years in terms of the regular season, so I'm not real. And if push comes to shove, I'm probably a Colts fan over a Bucks fan, but I root for both. So yeah, I don't. At least it's not like I have two AFC East teams. You know what I mean, or two AFC South teams that I want to be like my teams. Sure. They're about as far apart as you can get.
Or like a Yankees Red Sox or something.
Oh yeah. I'm a huge Colts fan, and I love Tom Brady.
Nice. Yeah. No, I actually was raised with half the family Sox fans and half the family Yankees fans. So
ooh, man, those must be made for interesting family reunions.
Definitely. Anyways, Layne, thanks for being so open and sharing a lot of different kind of maybe questions that perhaps some of our listeners haven't heard you touch upon before. Love to have you on the show again some other time if there's a relevant topic, and wish you all the best with the upcoming podcast. I'm sure it's going to be super awesome stuff, and it sounds like you got a great lineup of guests lined up. And so everyone, be sure to stay posted on Layne, as I'm sure you are, and you'll get all the details coming up.
Awesome. Yeah, stay in touch. Biolayne.com. We'll have all the stuff up there.
Cool, man. Appreciate it.
All right, bud. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yep. Take it easy.
All right, buddy. Later.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 36 of Muscle, Science, and Application. We release a new episode 7 days a week, so you can look forward for more great guests like Layne, reviews of scientific research articles relating to building muscle, and a variety of other helpful tips for training, life, and business. I highly recommend you check out Layne's new podcast, Physique Science. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of podcasts as a way to learn while doing other things like driving, prepping food, doing cardio, or any other task conducive to multitasking. You always benefit from consuming multiple sources and a variety of content, getting perspectives from a variety of people, and coming to your own conclusions. As Layne said, they're going to cover a lot of topics and bring them down to a level that everyone can understand. And quite frankly, they're going to bring a ton of experience from working with clients one-on-one that you can't get on this podcast. So again, I highly recommend you tune in. Finally, one of the biggest things about biolayne.com is Layne has compiled a group of preferred coaches. As he said, he's pretty much always at capacity, and so he's surrounded himself with numerous exceptional coaches that can help you and your clients optimize their body composition, prepare for bodybuilding and powerlifting competitions, and just, really optimize their physique and overall metabolic health. Most importantly, though, his preferred coaches understand those nuances of working with individual people, the way human metabolism adapts over time according to what you throw at it, so they can really help you and your clients tackle those tough issues of stagnated progress and getting at why that might be and possible solutions. Head over to biolayne.com and inquire about one-on-one coaching, and you'll get a thorough interview process to hook you up with the best coach for you, whether that might be Layne or one of his other top-notch coaches. Again, as he mentioned, it's all about finding that perfect coach-client fit on a variety of means, both in terms of level of expertise they can offer, as well as just a click when it comes to personalities and things, and they'll definitely help you do that over there. So that's all for today. You can look forward to another episode tomorrow and every day. Subscribe through Apple's podcast app, the Spreaker or Stitcher Radio app for your Android device, or using your Windows phone so you'll be sure not to miss a single episode. We'll catch you tomorrow. Take care. Hey guys, Muscle Science and Application t-shirts are now free when you order from PR Products. Our flagship product, the Recover Roller, is a high-density sports massage roller used by NFL football players, elite powerlifters, and bodybuilders around the world. You can custom embroider your roller with your logo, name, and choose any color for it that you want. Get all the info about this free t-shirt offer at appliedmusclescience.com/shirt.
Thanks for listening to Muscle, Science, and Application. We'll be back tomorrow. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on iTunes. Find us at appliedmusclescience.com.